They tried to drive her out of town in shame. The cowboy took her hand and said, "She stays with me." The sun was sinking low over the rugged hills when Clara Hayes stepped down from the stagecoach onto the cracked, dusty streets of Willow Creek. The town was still a little more than a crooked main street lined with false-fronted buildings, their wooden signs creaking faintly in the wind. The place smelled of horse sweat, wood smoke, and the sharp tang of dusk that never quite settled. Clara clutched the handle of her carpet bag tightly, her knuckles pale against the worn leather, and shifted the fiddle case to her other hand. Everything she owned in this world, everything she had left her, was contained in those two pieces. Her black dress, faded with wear, set her apart from the woman she saw on the boardwalk. Their bonnets were neat, their skirts freshly pressed, their eyes sharp and curious as they took her in. Clara felt the weight of their stares as surely as if they were stones pressing against her ribs. She lowered her gaze. Though it didn't help much, she could still hear their whispers drifting like wind over prairie grass. "That's her, the widow from back east. Poor thing, a broken bar, or maybe poor fool. I heard her man left deads higher than the church steeple." Clara set her jaw and kept walking. She had learned in the past year that whispers followed a woman like smoke. You cling to her hair, her clothes, her skin. The harder you tried to brush them away, the more they lingered. Better to keep moving, one foot in front of the other, and pretend not to hear. The street wasn't kind. A group of men lounging outside the saloon leaned forward, spitting tobacco juice into the dirt and eyeing her as if she were a curiosity, some wild animal wandering too close to town. A pair of children pointed openly, one tugging on the other's sleeve and whispering something that made them both giggle. Even the shopkeepers gave her sidelong glances as she passed their doorways, as if measuring whether her presence would bring good business or bad luck. Clara squared her shoulders and reminded herself of the promise she'd made when she left the last town behind. "This time will be different. This time I'll find a place to belong." She had taken the sewing job offered through Electra. An opportunity, however small, was better than none. She wasn't here for friendship or favors, she was here to survive, to start again. But survival was never simple in a town like Willow Creek. The shop where she'd been offered work sat near the end of Main Street, a narrow building squeezed between the blacksmith's and a feed store. A hand-painted sign above the door read "Mrs. Carter's Dressmaking Repairs." Clara took a steadying breath and pushed the door open. Inside, the air was close with the smell of fabric, starch, and lavender soap. Bolts of cloth leaned against the wall, and half-finished dresses hung like silent ghosts on wooden forms. Behind a counter, Mrs. Carter, an older woman with iron gray hair and eyes sharp as sewing needles, looked up from her stitching. "You're Clara Hayes," she said, not a question but a statement. "Yes, ma'am," Clara answered softly. She placed her carpetbag down at her feet, suddenly aware of the dust on her hem and the weariness in her posture. Mrs. Carter studied her for a long moment before nodding curtly. "You'll start tomorrow. Work steady if you keep your head down. Pay won't make you rich, but it'll keep you fed." Relief flooded Clara, so sudden it almost made her knees weak. "Thank you. I'll work hard, I promise." Mrs. Carter gave a short sniff, neither approving nor disapproving. "See that you do. And one more thing," as she leaned forward slightly, lowering her voice. "This tone a broken bar, it don't take kindly to scandal. Best that you mind yourself, Mrs. Hayes. Folks here remember things long after they're gone." Clara's stomach tightened. She knew the warning wasn't without reason. Rumors traveled faster than stagecoaches, and even though her husband's failings were buried back east, whispers had a way of sprouting new roots wherever she went. Still, she lifted her chin. "I understand, ma'am." Mrs. Carter didn't reply. She returned to her stitching, and the conversation was over. That evening, Clara rented a small room above the livery. The walls were thin, the mattress lumpy, and the smell of hay clung to the air, but it was shelter. She set her carpetbag down by the bed, laid her fiddle case gently on the table, and sat for a long moment in silence. She let the weight of the day press down on her eyes, the whispers, the warning. Then she took a deep breath, straightened her back, and whispered to the empty room, "It'll be different this time. It has to be." But as the sun vanished and the town's lamps flickered to life, Clara couldn't shake the feeling that Willow Creek was already closing its judgmental hands around her, and that sooner or later, she'd have to fight to stay. The morning sun spilled gold across Willow Creek, But for Clara Hayes, it did little to ease the heaviness that pressed against her chest. She rose early, brushed the wrinkles from her black dress, tied her hair into a modest knot, and carried herself down the narrow stairs from her rented room above the livery. The streets were already alive with movement. The wagon wheels creaked, horses snorted, shop doors banged open, and the smell of biscuits drifted faintly from the diner. Clara held her carpetbag close as she walked toward the dress shop, aware of every look that followed her. The night before, she had convinced herself that things would feel better come morning. But daylight only made the stares sharper. A group of women outside the general store paused their conversation as she passed, lowering their voices but not enough to hide the words. "Widow Hayes, that's what they're calling her. She don't look like a woman who brings good fortune." "Well, mark my words, that trouble follows women who travel alone." Clara quickened her pace, pretending she hadn't heard. Her shoes clicked against the boards of the walkway until she reached Mrs. Carter's shop. The familiar scent of starch and fabric was oddly comforting. At least here, she had a task, a reason to belong. Mrs. Carter greeted her with a curt nod. "You're on hemming duty. 2 dresses by noon. Let's see if your stitches are worth the wages." Clara slipped behind the counter and set to work. Her hands moved steadily, the rhythm of needle and thread as natural as breathing. For a time, she managed to lose herself in the simple repetition, forgetting the eyes that judged her outside. But peace never lasted long in Willow Creek. Near midday, the door swung open with the jingle of the bell. Clara glanced up, only to find 3 townsfolk stepping in. Sadia, a young woman in a pale blue dress, her mother, and the blacksmith's wife. Their gazes swept over Clara, pausing with barely concealed disdain before turning to Mrs. Carter. "Good day," the mother said briskly. "We're here to inquire about a gown for the harvest dance." Mrs. Carter bustled forward to assist, but Clara could feel the trio's eyes flicking back toward her like prickling nettles. The blacksmith's wife leaned toward the younger woman and murmured, just loud enough for Clara to hear, "Imagine trusting your dress to the likes of her. A woman who couldn't keep her husband out of debt. What chance does she have with a needle?" Heat rose in Clara's cheeks. She bent her head lower, focusing on her stitches, though her hands trembled. Every word landed like a pebble tossed against glass, small but capable of shattering if enough struck at once. Mrs. Carter must have sensed the tension, for she snapped, "If you're looking for gossip, best find it outside. In here, we work." The woman stiffened but said nothing more, retreating to the racks of fabric. Clara breathed slowly, trying to steady herself, but the damage was already done. No matter how fine her stitching, the town's judgment clung to her like burrs on a hemline. By the time the clock struck noon, Clara's head ached. She asked Mrs. Carter for leave to fetch a meal, and though the older woman only grunted, it was permission enough. Clara stepped back into the bright street, shielding her eyes from the glare. Across the way stood the diner, a modest building with lace curtains in the windows. She hesitated at the door, knowing full well what awaited here: a curious eyes, whispered words, perhaps even a seat left vacant when she approached. Hunger won over hesitation. She stepped inside. The murmur of conversation faltered. Heads turned. Clara ignored them, sliding into a corner booth. The waitress, a tired-looking girl with freckles, approached slowly. "What'll it be?" "Just coffee and a plate of biscuits, please," Clara said, keeping her voice polite. As the girl left, Clara allowed herself to glance around the room. Ranch hands with dusty boots, merchants in clean vests, wives with children tugging at their sleeves, all of them belonged here in a way she did not. For a fleeting moment, she wondered if she should have kept moving, if settling in Willow Creek had been a mistake. That was when the door swung open, and silence fell heavier than before. A man entered, tall, broad-shouldered, his hat casting shadow over sharp, weathered features. His boots rang against the wooden floor, each step unhurried, certain. Dust clung to his long coat, and his spurs jingled faintly, the sound carrying farther than it should in the hush. Clara's gaze caught on him before she could look away. Something about the steadiness of his stride, the way he carried himself, marked him as different. The room seemed to part for him, men shifting in their seats, women glancing his way with half-curious, half-cautious eyes. He made no effort to claim attention, yet it was his all the same. The waitress hurried forward, her tone warmer than it had been with Clara. "Mr. Carter, your usual." The managed Carter. Clara realized that. He gave a short nod. His voice was low, steady. "Coffee, steak and potatoes." As he moved toward a table, his eyes flicked briefly across the room. For a fraction of a second, they met Clara's, gray as a stormy sky. They lingered just long enough to make her breath catch. Then he looked away, settling at his seat. Clara forced herself to lower her gaze. It was nothing, just a glance, yet she couldn't shake the strange steadiness in those eyes, as if he had seen more in a heartbeat than others bothered to see in weeks. When her food arrived, she ate quickly, keeping her head down. But all the while, she was acutely aware of Jed Carter's presence, of the quiet authority he carried, of the way even the rowdiest ranch hands seemed to temper themselves in his company.